My name is Paul Logan. I am the operations manager for fire and EMS at the Dane County Public Safety Communications Center. I've been with the department, I'm in my 21st or 22nd year, I've lost track of time. I've pretty much done every job in the communications center. I started as a dispatcher in 1993, worked my way up through the ranks to now being number 2 in the organization, and love it. It's really a great job. I've been a paramedic, I've been a firefighter, I worked as a paramedic in New York City for several years, and working at 911 is sort of the best of all those worlds. We have an amazing opportunity to really impact people's lives at horrible times. I mean, me and my coworkers have spoken to people at the worst possible times in their lives, and sometimes at the best possible times in their lives too, delivering babies, so on and so forth. So I really just want to go through this document. If you have any questions along the way about what we're covering, or something pops into your head and you want to ask me a question about it, I'm happy to answer questions. So we used to, our message to the public up until a couple of years ago was 911 is for emergencies. The problem with that, we heard, and experience showed us, is that the word emergency is pretty subjective. What's an emergency to you, and to you, and to you, and to me could mean different things. And so what we found, and not unusually from the senior population, quite frankly, was they tended to not want to call 911 for something that they didn't want to bother people with. And so we sort of changed our outward message to, if you think you need a police car, a fire truck, or an ambulance to come and help you or somebody else, call 911. The reasons for that are several. First of all, if you dial a 7-digit number or you dial the 9-digit, the 911, it's going to be answered by the same folks. When you dial 911, your phone supplies us with certain information that can help speed a response. And I have to caveat that by saying it's different, of course, if you call on your home phone, a traditional 2-watt pair of copper wires, or a cell phone, or to a lesser degree, a VoIP phone if you get your phone service from the cable TV company, or if you use Vonage, or if you use Magic Jack, all of which are fine. But 911 works a little bit differently with all of those devices. So really, if you or somebody you know thinks, geez, somebody really should come and take a look at this, dial 911. It goes to the top of the queue. It's going to get answered faster than if you dial a 7-digit number. If you dial a 7-digit number, you're going to get into a phone tree where it's going to say, if this is an emergency, press 1. If it's for this, press 2. For this, press 3. And we've kind of had to go to that on our non-emergency lines just because of the volume of calls we're getting. And we get so many calls that aren't for emergency services, they're for something else. So we put this sort of new philosophy in, call 911 if you think you need a response, and let the phone tree help. And what we found was the phone tree's been in, I want to say it's been in 3 or 4 years. It took, right off the top, took about 17% of our calls away from us. So that helps us with staffing. And we found that 17% of those calls aren't for emergency services. My friend's in jail, where do I park my car, so on and so forth. How do I reach the Verona Police Department to talk about a barking dog, any number of things, 17% of our calls. And we process, last year, we processed just shy of 600,000 phone calls, incoming and outgoing phone calls. So 17% is a pretty good sized number. If you're talking, 500,000 or more. So if you think you need someone to come, call us. The person, the man or woman that answers the phone will help determine the best, most appropriate response, or refer you to someone else, or help resolve the problem right there without having to do anything. If you do call 911, even by mistake, don't hang up. One of the things that one of the things we find is we obviously have a limited number of people that are at work that can answer phones. We have to staff, our staffing is based on sort of the average call volume. We can't staff for that crash at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the Beltline because that doesn't happen every day. So we staff for sort of average. We look at our call volumes over the past 2 or 3 years and we determine when our busiest periods are, and then we set up our staffing. So one of the things that happens is people will dial 911 either by mistake or they change their mind and they hang up. But what people don't realize is that if you dial 911, once your call is routed to the system, and if it gets to sort of halfway through the process, the call is going to come to us. The call will be completed, and if the call is completed, we will answer it. There'll be nobody there, but then we're obligated to attempt to reach that person who called us. So what happens many times, is that person A is driving down the road, they see an incident, they dial 911, unaware, I assume, that the person in front of them also dialed 911, and the person in front of them, and the person going this way, and the person over here, and so there's no one available to answer that call immediately, and so the call is ringing. It might ring 3 or 4 times, it might ring for a minute, which if you're seeing a crash or a house fire or something else, it can seem like a really, really long time. And what will happen is sometimes people will hang up. And then they hang up, but the call comes to us. Then the person with the cell phone will dial 911 again. That call gets connected, so now I'm talking to you on 911, but Becky's calling you back because she got your first call. So now you've got 2 dispatchers tied up for 1 call. So what we say is, if you dial 911, even if you think, oh, I didn't need to do this, or oh, thought I was dialing 211 or 411, just let it ring. Tell the dispatcher, I didn't mean to do that, whatever. Depending on which community you live in, depending upon what kind of location information we have from you, the police may still respond. Because there has been cases over the years where you dial people in a situation, domestic violence situation or some other sort of crime situation, they dial 911, next thing you know the bad guy is there pointing a gun at them and says, tell them everything's okay. So many times the dispatcher, especially the seasoned dispatcher who's been doing it a long time, they get a gut instinct, they get a gut feeling, they tell the cops, you gotta go to this. Some communities, the cops automatically go, even if the dispatcher says, nope, I spoke to Becky, everything's fine, it was a senior center, they're still gonna come. Every community, every department has their own policies and procedures for how they do that. So that's why you shouldn't please don't hang up when you dial 911. The other thing that we installed a couple of years ago is you actually will now get a recording. If you dial 911 and your phone rings more than 15 seconds, which sounds quick, but it's really not, you'll get a recording telling you that you've reached Dane County 911. So there's no question that you dialed the right number, and that all the operators are busy, and we'll get to your call as soon as we can. The machine doesn't say to not hang up. It says, because we don't want people to think, I'm on my house phone and they told me not to hang up, but my kitchen's on fire. Hang up, you have to do whatever you have to do to stay safe, but know that you've reached your call. In that scenario, if you hung up the phone and bailed out of your burning house, your call would still ring into us and we would send the police. At least somebody would be coming until somebody else calls us. So the other thing that many folks don't take into consideration, because they're not aware of it, is if you dial, if we were sitting here and I have 2 different cell phones and I dial this number from this number, this phone might ring 2 or 3 or 4 times before this phone rings once. It's the same thing when you dial 911. Your call from Verona, when you dial 911, has to find the nearest cell phone tower, then it has to go from the cell phone tower into the regular telephone network, then it has to go all the way to Milwaukee, because it dips into the 911 database at the AT&T headquarters in Milwaukee. Then it comes all the way back to Dane County in Madison, and then gets answered. So you dial 911 on your cell phone, and it might ring 3 or 4 times before it ever rings downtown. And so if it rings 3 or 4 times and then rings 3 or 4 more times, you think, geez, what took you so long to answer the phone? Well, there's what's called setup time. It just takes a while for the phone to get into the system. So, when calling 911, do your best to stay calm and answer all questions. And I say that knowing that, everybody's different. The situation that you're looking at is going to dictate your calmness, but that's the best way to help the call taker determine where you are. The call taker is going to ask you where you are. Yes, if you call on your wireline phone, it's going to provide an address, but that's input by humans. There could be errors. We don't see very many. If you dial on your cell phone, when everything's working perfectly, it's probably going to put a dot right where you are, but it's not yet an exact science. It's still, I tell my family and friends this, and I tell people, I wouldn't bet my life on the technology yet. It continues to get better, continues to improve, but we're not quite there yet. There's variables. There's variables built in to how different devices work. Newer device, both of these devices are GPS enabled, so these devices are likely to, do pretty close. AT&T phones, not all their phones have GPS yet, so they actually have to do like a triangulation, and they look at where the tower locations are and how long it took the call to reach the tower, and they triangulate. When everything's working great, it works fine, but there's variables. So the key is to stay calm and really to know where you are. It amazes me the number of people that are out driving around on our highways and byways. They call 911 and we say, okay, where are you? I don't know. I'm on I-90. What's the last sign you saw? Chicago. Literally. People are just, because they're in there, they got their radio on, or they're talking, or they're on their phone, and they're really not paying attention. Even when they're driving around their own neighborhoods, we're so used to just turning by landmarks, and I'm guilty of it too. People don't pay that much attention to their surroundings. They don't know where they are, and that can really help getting sent to someone. So being aware of your surroundings, knowing where you are, can be a big help. Staying calm, answering the questions. A couple things about that. We at the Dane County 911 Center use pre-scripted, pre-written questions to determine what's happening and determine the best and most appropriate help to send to you, whether it's a heart attack or a fire or a police incident. But what is really important to keep in mind is that when the dispatcher or the call taker is on the phone with you, in all of those cases, depending on the severity of the case, if you're calling me about somebody that is unconscious and not breathing, we're going to ask you 12 questions, but the help got sent after the second question. As soon as we verify the address, verify the phone number, ask you your name, and say, tell me what happened, and you say, George is down, he's not breathing, that call is getting sent to the ambulance right then. But the call taker is going to stay with you and ask George's age, and did you see what happened, and did he choke on anything, and here's what we can do to help him. So it's important because many times people will say, just hang up and send the help. The help has already been sent. In our department, we have anywhere from 10 people on duty at a time to 16 people on duty at a time. So we've got folks that are answering the phones and telling people where to go. So they've got the dispatchers, the police dispatchers, the sheriff dispatchers, the fire and EMS dispatchers that are sending the help out, while me or the call takers are answering the phones. We're inputting information into the computer-aided dispatch system. So it's not delaying help. by us gathering information. The information that we gather helps send the most appropriate response. For instance, we started this, I guess it was back like 2006. Previous to 2006, if someone in Mount Horeb was having chest pain, let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and George wakes up with chest pain. They call 911, they say, George is having chest pain. 62-year-old male, pale, sweaty, no history of a heart problem. I think he's having a heart attack. So the 911 dispatcher, we would set off the pager tones for Mount Horeb Fire Department, Mount Horeb Ambulance, and the volunteers would wake up at their house, drive to the station, get in the ambulance, drive to George. Now that could be 6 minutes, or if he lives out in the town of Primrose somewhere, it could be 16 minutes. Then the ambulance would get there, they would do an assessment on George and say, by golly, we think that the paramedics, at the time, Fitzroy didn't have paramedics. Pretty much only the city had paramedics at that time. And the paramedics could help, so send paramedics. So then what the dispatcher would do is, the dispatcher would either call probably Madison Fire Station 2 from Grand Canyon by Westtown, or Station 6 from Badger Road off of Park Street. And that ambulance would get on the road and they'd start driving to Mount Horeb. And depending on what was happening with George, Mount Horeb would either wait there at the scene, or they would load George in the ambulance and they'd meet somewhere on 18151, and paramedics would jump in the back of the Mount Horeb ambulance and they'd start doing what they do for that. Paramedics obviously have a higher level of care. They can do more pre-hospital. They can give narcotics and clot-busting drugs and everything to help that chest pain victim. So after we put these protocols into place in 2002, we instituted closest dispatch and automatic dispatch on the highest acuity cases. So because we're able to ask these questions that are, by the way, not just something that somebody dreamed up, there's 20 years of science behind them. They're overseen at the international level by a medical director. We have our own medical director here in Dane County that just oversees the communication center, Dr. Paul Stiegler, a 20-year veteran emergency physician. So he's approved all these protocols. So now when the same chest pain comes in Mount Horeb, George dials 911 and says, I'm having chest pain. Depending on the acuity level, if he says he's sweating and he's got pressure in his chest and he's 50 years old and nothing relieves it, then not only are the dispatchers going to send the Mount Horeb ambulance because they're closest, but they're, without any questions, they're going to send the Verona ambulance from Verona, paramedics, all automatically to Mount Horeb. So we're really cutting down the time that it takes to get that advanced life care to that patients who really need it. The other interesting thing that this system allows us to do is at the north end of Verona, where Verona and Fitchburg and sort of Madison come together, where the Fitchburg Fire Station is behind PDQ on King James. If you go down McKee Road, south of McKee Road is City of Madison homes. So if I'm in my City of Madison home south of McKee Road and dial 911 for chest pain, who's going to come? Well, Station 2 or Station 7 or Station 12 from 6 miles away, when this ambulance is sitting right here in Fitchburg. It's only 2 miles away or 1 mile away in some cases. So since we've put this system into place, we got the fire chiefs and the EMS chiefs to agree that, geez, wouldn't it make more sense to send the closest help to the most serious patients? And absolutely it does. So today, if we get that call over here, then we don't send Madison, we send Fitchburg, Fitchburg EMS to go to that patient, even though they're in the City of Madison. So regardless of what it says on the side of the ambulance, they're all, the paramedics in Dane County are all trained to the same level. They all carry the same drugs. They all have know the same procedures. In fact, the medical director, Dr. Lohmeyer, is the medical director for all the paramedics in Madison, in Dane County. So it just makes more sense. And we've seen, since we started doing that in, I don't know, 2005-ish, guess what? We've actually saved a lot of lives. The paramedics have saved a lot of lives. So that's why the protocols do work. They allow us to get the best information to send the best, most appropriate care. Covered the location. Teach your children how to call 911. Same thing. One of the things that we tell parents and grandparents is if you find your kid playing with the phone, or the kid was playing with the phone, all of a sudden they're not playing with the phone anymore, and your phone rings and it's 911. Don't admonish your kid from knowing how to do that. It's a great learning moment. Yes, so 911 works. Yes, they called us back, but we don't want parents to jump on the kid for calling. So the next time something happens they're not sure about, they say, "Oh, I'm not going to call because last time I called I got in trouble." So we try to encourage parents to use that as a learning moment. If you are trying to, they do it in most schools, but if you want your child to know how to do it, call the non-emergency number of the communication center and say, "I want my son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter to dial 911 because I want them to see how it works." And 80 times out of 100, they're going to say fine, unless something's really busy or something big is going on. Or they might ask you to call back later in the evening or something like that. But usually they're going to be fine with it. Prank calls, they still do waste a lot of our time. One of the other things we encourage parents or anybody with cell phones to do, cell phones really weren't widespread until 93, 94. Even then they were kind of still novelties. But shortly after that, the FCC mandated that any cell phone, whether it's got service on it or not, can dial 911. So the cell phone you had 12 years ago, the StarTAC or the big Motorola phone, if you find the charger and you charge that up and turn it on, it will still dial 911. The problem with that is it comes into us with no information, which is bad if there's a problem. And we can't call you back. We can't tell where you are. So what we find is parents give kids cell phones to play with, or they give a child or a teenager a phone. You can always dial 911 on this phone, and that's all good and well. But again, if they're out in some sketchy area where the signal coverage is so-so, and they get through to us, and that's all we hear, we can't really help. So it really provides a false sense of security. In fact, for a while, the DA's office and some of the battered women advocates were giving out what we call non-initialized phones and saying you could dial 911. And some people were giving them to their senior parents and stuff. And we've really tried to say, don't do that. It's bad business. It provides a false sense of security. Not a good deal. Go to Walmart and buy a track phone or something else that actually has service on it. So that's very dangerous. Why does it ring so long? Recording. Busy signal. So you could dial 911 and hear a busy signal. It is pretty rare, but again, there's only so many lines going in there. We have 9 wire lines, so 9 people from their home phone anywhere in Dane County could dial 911 at the same time. The 10th person will get a busy signal. And we have about 14 wireless lines. So 14 people on cell phones can dial 911. Of course, we can only answer about 6 of those. So some calls will go into the queue and they'll be holding, but the 15th or 16th person will get a busy signal. It doesn't happen very often. In fact, we get reports periodically from AT&T, and maybe get 3 or 4 busy signals a quarter. So not very many in a year. Are all 911 calls handled by Dane County 911? The answer to that is no. But we've got a pretty unique setup in Dane County. We've got the 911 center in downtown Madison. We answer for all the unincorporated areas of the county, the city of Madison, many towns and villages and cities, but not all. The city of Monona owns and operates its own 911 PSAP, Public Safety Answering Point. So anybody who lives within the footprint of the city of Monona who picks up a house phone and dials 911, that call will go to Monona. However, if they're in their house in Monona, they dial 911 on their cell phone, the call comes to us. If it's for, and then we transfer that call to Monona. Same thing in Sun Prairie, and the same thing in Middleton. With the exception that Middleton does answer some of their own wireless calls. They wanted to get into the wireless call answering business. The challenge is, because a cell phone works off of radio signals, where that call goes is not an exact science. So clearly there are calls that come to us that are in Middleton, and there are calls that are in Middleton that come to us, just like we get calls around the county that aren't for us. There's a cell tower in the southwest part of the county, on our side of the county, that calls from Greene County and Lafayette County end up coming to us. There's a call, there's a cell tower out near Mazomanie and the Iowa County line, and there's a bar over in Arena on the river, and they had big bar fights and a lot of trouble out there. And when they dial 911, those calls come to us because they hit that cell tower. And if you're coming over the Springfield Hill, coming from Sauk County, and you dial 911, you're very likely to get Iowa County because it hits a tower over in Iowa County. So the whole cell phone thing, again, still not an exact science, hard to predict where the call will go. But so not every call will necessarily be answered by Dane County 911. The UW Police Department, they have their own 911 center. So if you dial from a campus property or campus building, it will go to them. But again, if you dial 911 on your cell phone, generally it will come to us. What if I don't speak English? We have a contract with a language provider called Language Line. It was a part of AT&T, and it's now its own company. And they provide 160 some languages within 90 seconds. So at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody calls us that speaks Russian or Spanish or Portuguese or Swahili, all of which languages we've dealt with. We can connect them with the language line. If we have an idea of what language they're speaking, Spanish, we can tell them, but they have interpreters on the phone that are able to help us distinguish what language somebody's speaking as well. We've been using that system for, I think, my entire existence, more than 20 years. That system's been around, and it works well. We use it every day. We mainly use it for Spanish, Vietnamese, Cambodian, because of the Hmong population. But we do have a growing number of Eastern Europeans, other Asian languages, and because of the university, every other language is thrown in around here. Is it possible, can the 911 center communicate with speech, hard of hearing? Of course, every one of our phone stations has a TTY built into it. So if somebody's calling us with a TTY device, now we don't get too many TTY device calls. I'm not sure that the hard of hearing, the deaf community in Madison, the population is that big. But we do that. We sort of stress now, and I think more and more organizations are stressing people to go through the relay system. Dial 711 on your phone, and that connects you up with the Wisconsin Relay, who then calls us. They're experts. That's all they do is communicate with deaf and hard of hearing. So they're better at it than, say, one of my folks who may never have dealt with somebody. And it's not difficult, but the language they speak is a little different. They tend to speak in acronyms and codes and shorter phrases. So the folks at the relay, the way it would happen is the person would dial 711, get the relay, and then the relay would call us, and they speak to us, and then they type back and forth with the non-hearing or the hard of hearing person. That will be somewhat, I think, replaced in the future with text messaging. Text messaging, anybody who's got kids knows my 16-year-old son does about 14,000 text messages a month, and I think he's probably, average. But text messaging is coming. Today in Dane County, you cannot send a text message to 911, but we had hoped to accomplish that yet this year. We may still accomplish it this year. Still not an exact science, but it's coming. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. We're poised at Dane County and at 911 centers around the country for what's termed next generation 911. That's things like texting. That's things like being able to send a photograph. Hey, this person just hit my car, or this person just robbed me, or raped me, or stole my purse, or I just pulled up to this crash scene, and here's a picture of it, so you can send the right help, and that's coming. And videos to 911. So it's a scary, coming from, starting in '93 before most people, only, doctors and lawyers had cell phones in 1993. To where if you saw something on the highway, you had to stop, you had to get off the highway, find a payphone, or go home and dial 911. So if there was a crash on the highway, we'd get like one call on it, even if it was a nasty crash. Or today, a crash at, say, Verona Road in the Beltline, even if it's halfway serious, we're going to get a dozen calls within about 15 seconds. Yeah, crazy. So we've really come full. We've already come around this far, and now we're going to keep going with now getting text messages and picture messages and video messages, and
So you're going to have to hire more people
well,
because of that, or potentially?
Potentially, because it's so new, there's not too many departments. In fact, one of the first departments to get text messages to 911 was out in western Iowa, it was a pilot project, and they haven't seen a big influx. There's some other departments that are doing it, haven't seen a big influx, so we'll have to see.
Yeah.
We'll have to see. It'll be, having a campus, that'll be different. So I don't know how that'll work, but it's scary. Technology is both good, but it's also adds a lot of complications, especially in our business. So I said you had to get off a highway and find a payphone. Today, we might get 15 calls on a crash, but I might talk to somebody that's standing right over the person and can give me the best information. Or I might talk to a person that witnessed the crash, so they can give us really good information. So it's a double-edged sword. It really is. And we have to treat, every one of those calls, every one of those 15 calls about the crash, we have to make sure that it's really that crash. Yesterday, there was a fatal crash out at 12 and 18 on Highway N, or N and Natvig right there. But within minutes of that crash, not 200 yards away, there was another crash where a car rolled over because people were backed up and stopping. And I don't know if the person came over a ridge and got sun in their eyes and saw the car stopped, but like 3 more people went to the hospital. That's when we're taking calls of a crash, especially on a busy highway. It's not unusual because of rubberneckers and backed up traffic to get more than one collision in the same general area. So we have to answer each one of those phones, and we have to make sure we're talking about the same crash that the first caller was talking about. So very challenging. Very challenging. What else? Questions? Comments?
One Sunday morning, I wanted to call the non-emergency number, and I ended up at Dane County. But here in Verona, Verona doesn't answer the phone on Sundays?
Nope, their office typically is just staffed during the week, Monday through Friday. I think they have someone there 7, maybe to 7 p.m. And then they forward their phones to us, their non-emergency lines, as do a lot of the communities in Dane County. And then typically, if it's something that you need the police, because we dispatch for the Verona Police Department.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're
This is
welcome.
great.
Let's take a ride.